They fired me just 48 hours before the day I'd been waiting for 30 years. Not a warning, not a conversation, just a cold corporate sentence delivered by someone who barely knew my name. I walked into that office thinking I'd spend my last 2 shifts saying goodbye to friends, walking the floor one last time, and standing at my retirement ceremony, shaking hands with the CEO, maybe even smiling for the cameras. Instead, I walked out with a cardboard box. Inside, a photo of my family, a gold watch I'd been planning to wear that Friday, and the coffee mug my wife Linda gave me 15 years ago. They thought they'd humiliated me, that I'd go home, sit in silence, and let 30 years of loyalty be reduced to efficiency measures. They didn't know me. You see, this wasn't just about me losing a job. It was about the way they looked at me like I was some outdated piece of equipment they could toss aside. It was about the smirk on Karen Doyle's face, as if cutting me loose was just another checkbox on her to-do list. And they had no idea what was coming. No idea that by the time I was done, the factory wouldn't run another shift without me. Stick around. You're about to hear one of the most satisfying revenge stories I've ever lived. And if stories like this matter to you, you know where to find me. My name is Jack Miller. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 30 years, Riverside Manufacturing in Columbus, Ohio, has been my second home. I started here in the spring of 1994. I was 28 back then, young, hungry, and clueless about industrial machinery. My first week, I burned through a pair of work boots because I didn't know how hot the floor could get near the welders. An old-timer named Bill just laughed, handed me a coffee, and told me, if you can survive your first month here, you can survive anything. I survived. More than that, I thrived. I learned every machine on the line, trained dozens of new hires, and made it my mission to keep the floor safe. 30 years, not one safety violation under my watch. It wasn't just a job. It was the rhythm of my life. The smell of warm steel at 6 a.m. The hum of the conveyors when the first shift kicked in. The sight of the crew gathered around the coffee pot I brought in every morning. A habit I kept for decades because a warm cup meant a warm start. Linda, my wife, always said I gave more of myself to the plant than I did to my own house. She's probably right, but I believed in the place. Believed that if I worked hard, played fair, and kept my head down, Riverside would have my back. For 30 years, that belief held, until it didn't. Over the years, I became more than just a line worker. Somehow, without ever asking for it, I became the bridge between the floor crew and management. When the suits upstairs wanted to roll out a new safety protocol, they'd ask me first, Jack, do you think this will fly? And when the crew had a problem, they'd come to me before they went to the union rep. Not because I had authority, but because they knew I'd listen and I'd tell them the truth. I trained half the guys working here now. Mike Torres, I showed him how to run the press without losing a finger. Sam Walker, I taught him how to troubleshoot the welding line when the sensors acted up. Every name, every face, I carried them with me like family. At Riverside, reputation was everything, and mine was built on trust. Trust that I'd never cut corners on safety. Trust that I'd speak up when something wasn't right. Trust that I'd go to bat for my crew, even if it meant butting heads with management. It wasn't always easy. I've had my share of closed-door conversations with the plant managers who didn't appreciate me telling them their shiny new ideas were dangerous. But I slept better knowing I'd done right by my people. In a place like Riverside, you earn respect, inch by inch, year after year. And for 3 decades, I thought that respect was mutual. I was wrong. Things started to change about 6 months ago, right after Karen Doyle walked through the glass doors of Riverside Manufacturing. She was the new operations director straight out of some consulting firm in Chicago, armed with buzzwords no one on the floor could pronounce. From day one, she talked about efficiency metrics and resource optimization like we were just numbers on a spreadsheet. She brought in a team of clipboard-carrying analysts who timed everything how long it took to weld a seam to move a crate, even to drink a cup of coffee. Little things started disappearing. The coffee station on the floor gone non-essential amenity, she called it. Overtime for critical repairs slashed. Christmas bonus cut in half due to budget constraints. But it wasn't just the perks. It was the way she looked at us. Like we were relics from another era, taking up space that could be filled by younger, cheaper labor. She never asked for my input, never even pretended to care that I'd been running this floor longer than she'd been in the industry. I'd seen management changes before, some good, some bad. But this was different. Karen wasn't here to lead. She was here to strip the place down to the bolts and leave behind whatever still made money. I could feel the tension building in the way the crew whispered at lunch, in the way they glanced over their shoulders during shift meetings. Something was coming. I just didn't know it was coming for me. It was a Monday morning, 2 days before my retirement ceremony. I was halfway through my first coffee when my phone buzzed. Jack Miller, please report to the operations office immediately. Karen Doyle's office was on the second floor, all glass and steel, the kind of place that made the factory floor feel like another world. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Her fingers tapped at the keyboard, the soft clack sounding like a countdown I couldn't stop. Efficiency is key, she said, finally, eyes still on her screen. After reviewing your file, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. The words didn't make sense at first. I'd worked here 30 years. Not one safety violation. Trained half the people keeping this plant alive. My picture was already in the company newsletter under the headline "End of an Era." You'll still get your pension, Mr. Miller, she added, almost like it was a kindness. But the ceremony, that was a company courtesy. It's been canceled. I stood there, the weight of her words pressing into my chest. Linda had already bought a dress. My son Brian had taken time off work. And this woman who hadn't been here 6 months had just erased all of it with a few keystrokes. Jahar will walk you out, she said, already turning back to her screen. That's when I realized this wasn't about efficiency. This was about sending a message. And I was the example. 2 security guards were waiting in the hallway when I stepped out of Karen's office. Not the regular guys I'd known for years. These were contractors, younger built, like they'd been hired to move trouble, not talk to it. One walked in front of me, the other behind, as if I might bolt for the door. We passed the glass windows overlooking the floor. I saw Mike Torres stop mid-weld. Sam Walker leaned out from the paint booth, eyes narrowing. The hum of the machines faltered, not because they'd broken, but because people were watching. I kept my face still, my steps even. I nodded once to Mike. He nodded back slow and deliberate. In my hands was the cardboard box they'd given me. Inside my coffee mug from Linda, a framed picture of Brian when he was 5, and my reading glasses. 30 years of my life reduced to a box that barely weighed a pound. We walked past the break room. Conversations went quiet, past the maintenance bay. Tools hung in perfect order, like they were waiting for me to pick one up. Outside, the cold air hit me. The guards handed me the box like it was evidence. Then they turned and walked away without a word. I stood there staring at the gates of Riverside Manufacturing. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about losing my job. They wanted to make an example out of me, but they'd just given me a reason to fight back. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked through the door. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. She was humming back turned, rinsing a plate in the sink. When she looked up and saw my face, the humming stopped. Her eyes went straight to the cardboard box in my hands. They fired you. It wasn't a question. 2 days before the ceremony, I said, setting the box on the counter. Linda's expression shifted shocked disbelief, then something sharper. That's not just wrong, Jack. That's cruel. I told her about Karen Doyle. The cold words, the smirk that never reached her eyes. I told her about the guards, the silence on the floor, the way Mike and Sam had looked at me. Linda sat down across from me, hands wrapped around her coffee mug, like she was trying to keep her anger from spilling over. 30 years, Jack. 30 years you gave them. Do you know how many holidays you missed? How many dinners you skipped for what? She was right. Birthdays I'd worked through. Christmas Eve shifts I'd volunteered for because someone had to keep the line running. I'd told myself it was for us, for our future. But sitting there, I realized the truth. I'd been loyal to Riverside, and loyalty here was a one-way street. Linda leaned in, her voice low, but steady. Then maybe it's time they learn what happens when you treat people like that. Frank Harris had been the union rep at Riverside for over 20 years. We'd shared more bad diner coffee than I could count, usually at Murphy's on 5th Street, the kind of place where the waitresses knew your order before you sat down. He was already in a booth when I walked in, arms folded, jaw tight. Jackie said, nodding toward the seat across from him. I slid into the booth, the vinyl squeaking under me. This isn't just about you, Frank said, leaning forward. I've been hearing things. Karen's got a list. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I opened it, scanning the names. 24 in all. Every one of them over 55. Everyone within 2 years of retirement eligibility. And my name was right at the top. They're calling it strategic workforce optimization, Frank said, his voice dripping with contempt. Translation, cut the veterans before the pension kicks in. I felt my stomach tighten. I knew these men. Worked shoulder to shoulder with them for decades. Some had bad knees, bad backs, but they still showed up every day. This isn't efficiency, I said. It's a hit list. Frank nodded. They're hoping you'll just walk away quietly, but I think they picked the wrong guy to start with. I met his eyes, the hum of the diner fading into the background. He was right. They had picked the wrong guy. By the time I left Murphy's, it was barely 10 a.m. I hadn't even made it home before my phone started buzzing. First, it was Mike Torres. What happened? They walked you out. Then Sam Walker, heard you're gone. This true by noon, I'd counted 17 messages from the crew, all with the same mix of shock and anger. Word travels fast in a place like Riverside, faster than any official memo. By lunch break, every department knew I'd been terminated, and they knew about the list. Frank had already told a few trusted guys in different sections, maintenance, welding, paint people who could be counted on to keep the story straight, and the anger pointed in the right direction. Some of them called me directly. Jack, you trained me when I was Green Kevin from Paint said, if they can do this to you, none of us are safe. It wasn't just sympathy, it was fear. Fear that 30 years of loyalty meant nothing. That the next handshake from management could come with a pink slip. I could hear it in their voices, a shift. The quiet head-down compliance that had kept Riverside running for decades was cracking. By 3 p.m., I had more calls than I could answer. And I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. It was just after sunset when Mike Torres called. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Jack, what if the welders didn't start tomorrow morning? I stayed quiet, letting him talk. You know how it is, he went on. One station goes down, the whole line slows. Couple hours here, half a shift there. Nothing they can pin on anyone. Just bad luck. I could picture him leaning against his workbench, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no supervisors were around. Not 5 minutes later, Sam Walker texted paint booth compressors act up all the time. Wouldn't be hard to forget a reset. They weren't asking me to give orders. They were telling me they were ready. I thought about it. 30 years of keeping the line moving, fixing problems before they got worse. And now maybe for the first time letting the problems breathe. I'm not telling you to do anything I said into the phone. Mike chuckled. Didn't think you would. The call ended, but the seed was planted. They wanted to send a message, the kind that wouldn't show up in an HR report, but would echo through every corner of Riverside. And deep down I knew I wasn't going to stop them. Tuesday morning, 6:00 a.m. From my truck across the street, I watched the day shift file in. Mike Torres caught my eye as he passed the gate and gave the smallest nod. Sam Walker followed a few minutes later, toolbox and hand expression unreadable. At 6:15, my phone buzzed. Mike welding station down. Electrical fault. 6:22, Sam paint booth compressor won't start. Weird. 6:30, Kevin from maintenance forklift batteries dead. Must have drained overnight. It wasn't chaos. Not yet. But in manufacturing, everything is connected. No welds meant no assemblies. No paint meant no finished units. No forklifts meant raw materials sitting where they didn't belong. By 7:00 a.m., the floor was a slow-motion mess. Supervisors paced with clipboards frowning at stalled stations. Guys leaned on railings waiting for parts that weren't coming. I sipped my coffee, heart steady. From the outside, it looked like a morning full of bad luck, the kind that happens in old plants. But I knew better. These weren't accidents. They were signals. One quiet act at a time, the crew was showing Riverside that without its outdated people, nothing moved. And it was only the beginning. By Wednesday morning, the bad luck on the floor had turned into whispers outside the gates. That's when Frank called. You're going to want to see this, he said. I drove to the Union Hall. Frank was waiting in the parking lot, holding a copy of the Columbus Dispatch. Front page of the business section, Riverside Manufacturing implements aggressive cost-cutting measures. Right there, halfway down the article, was a quote from Karen Doyle. We're removing outdated personnel structures to streamline operations. Outdated personnel structures. That was me. That was Mike. That was every name on that list. Frank smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was controlled fury. I've made copies. Every department head will have one before lunch. By the time I got back in my truck, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Kevin from Paint just saw the article. Unreal. Beth in quality control. She really said that on record. Even Mickey Barnes, who had retired 5 years ago, texted need me to come down there. And then the real shift happened. At 9:15 a.m., a Channel 7 news van pulled up outside Riverside's main gate. The reporter started interviewing guys on break. Mike, Sam, Kevin, all telling the same story. 30 years of service means nothing. I watched from across the street, coffee in hand, as the cameras rolled. Karen wanted to make an example of me. Instead, she'd just given us a bigger stage. The media attention was hitting Riverside harder than I'd expected. By Thursday morning, the front office was in damage control emails. Flying supervisors pulled into closed-door meetings. That's when Frank called again. "We've got a leak," he said flatly. At first I thought he meant to the press, but then he clarified. Someone from the floor is feeding Karen details. Exact times of the equipment failures. Even who was near the stations when it happened. It didn't take long to narrow it down. Riverside wasn't that big, and the list of people with that level of access was short. By noon, we had a name, Eddie Collins, a junior maintenance tech I'd trained 2 years ago. Frank told me Eddie had been promised a supervisor track if he helped management identify troublemakers. The kid probably thought he was securing his future. I didn't call Eddie out. Instead, Frank spread a different kind of rumor that Friday's plan involved the assembly line in Section B. In reality, nothing was scheduled there. Sure enough, by Friday morning, Karen had 3 managers swarming Section B, inspecting every bolt like they expected sabotage. Meanwhile, the real slowdown happened 2 buildings over in welding and paint right under their noses. It was a clean move. Eddie stayed off our radar after that. And Karen, she just wasted her one shot at catching us red-handed. It was Monday morning when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. The main line for Riverside's executive office. "Mr. Miller," the voice said, smooth and cautious. "This is Gerald Hoffman, CEO. I'd like to meet. Today." We sat in a small conference room on the top floor, far from the hum of the machines. Hoffman didn't waste time. "I'll be blunt. The situation has become unsustainable." I didn't say a word. I just let him talk. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies, memos, emails, even time-stamped reports, all showing Karen Doyle had falsified productivity numbers to justify workforce optimization. Frank's union team had handed them to the press that morning. "She's been reassigned," Hoffman said. "Effective immediately." I closed the folder slowly, and the list. "Gone," he said. "No one else will be terminated under that program." He offered to reinstate me, but I shook my head. 30 years is enough, I said. Process my retirement with full honors. 2 weeks later, I stood in the union hall, gold-plated wrench in hand, engraved with my name. Linda was in the front row, smiling through tears. Mike, Sam, Kevin, all there. Even some retirees had come back just to see it. They'd tried to make me an example. They succeeded, just not in the way they planned. Standing there in the union hall, surrounded by friends, coworkers, and family, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, peace. Not because Karen Doyle was gone, not because the list had been destroyed, but because every single person in that room had chosen to stand together when it counted. 30 years at Riverside taught me a lot: how to run a welding station, how to troubleshoot a compressor, how to keep a crew safe through double shifts and brutal winters. But the most important lesson: loyalty is only worth something if it goes both ways. Karen thought firing me 2 days before my retirement would scare people into compliance. Instead, it showed them the truth that dignity matters more than any paycheck, and that standing up for each other is the only way to win. Revenge for me wasn't about screaming in someone's face or burning the place down. It was walking away with my head high, my pension intact, and the knowledge that no one else on that list would have to go through what I did. Sometimes the best revenge is leaving the room and letting the silence speak for you. As the applause faded in the union hall, I looked around the room one last time. These were the people who mattered, the ones who showed up when it counted, the ones who proved that solidarity is stronger than fear. I knew my chapter at Riverside was closed, but there are thousands of places just like it across the country. Thousands of men and women walking into work every day, trusting that 30 years of loyalty will mean something until the moment they find out it doesn't. That's why I tell my story, not just so you know what happened to me, but so you'll see it coming if it happens to you or someone you care about. Because when you've been blindsided like I was, you got two choices: walk away quietly, or stand your ground and make sure the people responsible know exactly what they've done. If this story hit you, if it reminded you of someone, or if it made you realize just how fragile job security really is, then stick around. I share stories like mine, so no one has to go through it alone. Hit that subscribe button, join this community, and be part of a place where we stand together just like my crew did. Because in the end, revenge isn't just about settling scores. It's about making sure the next guy doesn't get blindsided.